Hi, and welcome to The Existential Coach. This week I had a chance to interview Lesley Mitchell-Clarke, who's a hypnotherapist in Toronto. And I've met her in the music scene initially. She's a singer, and we've had a chance to play together a couple of times, and on breaks or in between shows we would talk. And of course, I'm always interested in the different approaches that people have, particularly in regards to supporting people, managing conflict, dealing with habits, addictions, and so on. And generally just the way in which we can connect with people and through these connections create a deeper meaning in our lives. And what I knew about hypnotherapy prior to meeting Lesley was embarrassing. Really, it was what I had picked up watching TV, seeing movies and so on, which is to say, it was hypnotherapy through the lens of stereotypes and cliches. It was hypnotherapy that turned people into, jabbering chickens or doing heinous acts or whatever it was. But as she explains throughout our conversation, that this really has nothing to do with what hypnotherapy actually is. And the tradition of hypnotherapy goes back thousands of years. And by moving into different states of consciousness, which we do when we sleep, for example, really what we're doing is we're accessing ourselves. And one of the things that struck me was how the conception of hypnotherapy or what a hypnotist does really painted a picture that the hypnotist is controlling the individual. But as she points out, this is completely the opposite of what happens. The hypnotherapist is, in a sense, a guide, walking us through an experience, but we don't go there if we do not want to go. And the power, the choice to go on this journey remains clearly embedded within our own being, within our own experience.
So anyway, what were you asking about particularly? We were talking about how I feel that, hypnotherapy is a really effective partner to the far more current talk therapy, behavioral therapy, what have you. Hypnosis is ancient in the extreme. It's well over 6,000 years old. And if one accepts the idea of previous sophisticated civilizations, it may well be even older than that. And one of the beautiful things about it is that, A, it's completely benign. The worst thing that can happen is someone falls asleep in trance and slips out of alpha state into delta state. That's, number one, benign. And number two, it's a process that is very quick because it's symptom driven, which is why, I have, previously we've talked about this. I really feel that the combination of psychotherapy or psychological services of any kind as in combination with hypnotherapy is an ideal quotient, ideal recipe for someone's healing. Because if I can minimize symptomatic behavior, anxiety attacks, free-floating anxiety, fears, night terrors, sleep issues, if I can get these things minimized, then the person engaging with the talk therapy or the behavioral therapy has, I think, a much greater chance of getting to truths and resolving the core issues.
And this point about getting ourselves to a space where we can feel safe, where we can relax, where we can feel open, that really is what is necessary prior to us thinking about options or different perspectives and so on. Because if the sky is falling, it's not the best time to have a philosophical discussion about what you're thinking about A versus B. What do you imagine so-and-so's perspective is and so on. So this notion that hypnotherapy can play a vital role in letting our body know and dealing with anxiety within our body, stress within our body, trauma within our body, that we can get to a regulated place, and that this sets the stage for what would be considered, say, psychotherapy or talk therapy, is an important piece in the embodiment question of how mind and body go together. And she talks more about this.
I really think that to get to the core issues, the talk therapy is incredibly effective, but it's not very fast. And with the utilitarian almost practice of hypnotherapy, we can get symptoms out of the way that will barricade progress through whatever talk therapy is being used. I believe that.
I asked Lesley about her experience with frontline workers, EMS workers, police officers, firemen and women, nurses, and various different people, and what role hypnotherapy played and plays in their therapeutic process.
The psychology practice with which I am currently affiliated almost exclusively works with trauma-based patients, first responders, paramedics, police officers, firemen. So I am always or quite often called upon to reduce the symptoms of trauma and fear and anxiety.
And as I talked in the beginning of this podcast, my understanding of what hypnotherapy is was completely wrong-minded. And in my conversations with Lesley, she's opened me to a deeper understanding, a correct understanding, a more plausible and more germane understanding of what hypnotherapy is and what role it can play. And I asked her to kind of walk me through those assumptions. Where do they come from? How do they operate? And how do we move from that really biased or entertainment version of hypnotherapy or hypnosis to the therapeutic modalities that she talked about using, for example, with emergency service workers?
Well, there's stage hypnosis, which many people have been exposed to either in television or at the state fair, what have you, and there's a lot of trickery in that. Those people that do that are barely separated from people you would call mentalists. It's a real show business thing, and there is trickery, which I can go into in more detail, but it is unrelated to hypnotherapy, which is the therapeutic use of hypnosis. It is completely unrelated. For one thing, in therapeutic hypnosis, the individual is not unconscious. What we do is we induct, all viable hypnotherapists will induct the client or patient, as the case may be, into a deep state of relaxation. And once the physical body is relaxed, and this is something that was known by the ancients, this is the core of truth behind this modality. Once the physical body is relaxed, then that, if you wish to call it a curtain or the barrier that separates our conscious mind, which is just a little tiny part of us that we walk around with and try to behave, from our subconscious mind, which contains all of our memories, in my belief system, the memories of many lifetimes, but certainly the origins of behaviors. And what we can do is, once that curtain is dissolved, once the body is relaxed and feels safe, then we can speak directly to the subconscious mind, where behaviors are all formed. And, phobias are usually based on misinformation. So because they often begin in childhood where something has been misinterpreted. But, we go in and we literally disrupt, like disrupting a circuit. We disrupt the circuit or the habit, if you will, of the particular negative thought that we're discussing, whether it's a phobia or an anxiety-driven response, whether it's nail biting, whatever it is. We go in there, we disrupt the negative thought, and we begin to create new neural pathways with a positive behavior that literally replaces the negative behavior. In fact, as a rule, you can't take something out without putting something in. So it's, the well-trained, hypnotherapist will be disrupting a negative behavior and replacing it with a positive one.
So just to unpack this a little bit, putting a pin on the idea of hypnosis or hypnotherapy for a moment, and we just think about we're having a tough day, we're having a hard day, and we're feeling anxious. So our body is activated, our mind is rushing, and we can't seem to find any solution that works. Now, let's imagine we're able to lie down for 15 minutes and we have a nice cool fan on us, or we have some music playing, or we have some whatever it is that starts to soothe us and calm us. And then in that process, as we relax, other options come up. We think about a solution or a potential solution, or maybe even a couple of potential solutions. And we begin to feel that there's more options, there's more potential. So in a sense, that's a kind of day-to-day example of how we had this negative, overwhelming experience that was replaced by a positive experience, by potential. And so this is something I'll do, which in a sense is like self-hypnosis, where finding a way to relax my body so I can let in more information, which is to say, move away from the negative habitual behavior and replace it with, as Lesley said, interrupt that circuit, and then in its place, create potential, create a new option, create new options. So I just wanted to offer that as perhaps a simple or even naive way of thinking about how we are engaging in this process often in our lives, but may not realize it. And with what Lesley is doing, she's really tapping into that energy and putting a spotlight on it, opening it up to a much broader and deeper effect.
All hypnosis is self-hypnosis. I'm just a guide. That's all I am, a guide who knows how to talk to the subconscious mind. But all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. So unless someone wants something, wants that change or that illumination or whatever we're working on, it won't happen. And those people that come in, I dare you to hypnotize me. Nothing's going to happen because they won't allow it to happen. So it's all about free will. So there is no Manchurian candidate syndrome, if you will.
I just want to pause the interview here at this point to talk about control, because this is something that comes up in a whole bunch of podcasts, whether we're talking about boundary violations, narcissism, we're talking about different ways of interpreting our social environment and how we pass judgment on others and how we are affected by those judgments and the way, for example, racism, sexism. All of these things operate as constructs that are imposed. And so by breaking these constructs, we have to shift into a new way of thinking. But that involves letting go. That involves surrender. And if we feel that we need to maintain control at all costs, then we are not able to see other forms of perspective, potential, ideas, points of view, all the rest of it. Instead, we are bound to our own preordained world. And this is something that Lesley talks more about.
But in its pure, unadorned therapeutic state, nothing bad can happen.
And yet, we can anticipate that there will be something that's bad that's going to happen. So this starts to speak to this question of control. And are we open to opening ourselves? And again, Lesley reassures us here.
If someone feels uncomfortable when I'm working with them, I tell them before we even start, if you feel uncomfortable for any reason, if you're cold, if you have to go to the bathroom, whatever it is, if you feel uncomfortable, you can just pull yourself out of trance, which is kind of like coming out of a daydream and shifting your focus. It's not as heavy duty as waking yourself up. So we do our best to keep clients or patients in the alpha state, which is between being awake and being asleep. That's the point of receptivity. That's where people go when they're meditating. I believe if people are praying devoutly, they go there too. I think it is a natural part of our existence as physical and spiritual beings to be able to adjust the vibration of our consciousness to uplift it and go where we want to go. It may also be a way to connect with, the Gestalt, the great, Akasha, some type of, but whatever it is, all it is a brainwave state. And I induce it by different techniques. And if the person is in the least bit uncomfortable, they can simply wake themselves up effortlessly.
And there's an interesting paradox here. We've talked about this before, but the paradox of control is that by limiting our experience, we recreate the situation that we're in. Yet, if we want to move out of that experience, if we want to become free from that situation, whatever it is, then we need to give up control. And so here's this contradiction, this paradox that on the one hand, this form of control we believe protects us, yet on the other, the change that we seek requires us to render or let go of this control.
In hypnosis, there are all kinds of different techniques that you can use, but imagery is a big one. And again, that would depend on whether the client is particularly a visual person or not. So part of what I have to do, or the biggest part in a way, is figure out how to talk to that person so they will be receptive. Should I use permissive language? Should I use authoritarian language? Should I create, visuals? And I don't mind telling you, I've done some really stupid things. I remember creating an extremely visual experience for one of my clients with lots of color, who was colorblind. So now that's a question I always ask, but some people are visual, some people are not. Some people are more emotionally responsive, some people are not. My job is to figure out, I'm a communicator and I have to adjust it, and I have to figure out how best to reach that person.
And what I loved about this is the playfulness, that there's a co-creation process going on, and that there's humor, and that there's mistakes and fallibility and real authentic experience transpiring between two people.
Always, I have had, either in person or more commonly now on Zoom or even the phone, now I do a very thorough intake of that individual. First of all, I want to know why they want to see me. I want to know what their misunderstandings of hypnosis are. If they have an idea that there's a magic bullet, that they can see me once for weight loss and that's it, that's not the way it works. An individual must bring their own willpower, their own desire to change, and we help with everything else. If it is a weight loss thing, we can key out the desires for I would say the problem foods, carbs, sugars, whatever we can instigate exercise. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we do for weight loss, but none of it will work if the individual doesn't want it.
And here we come back to the question of control and change. And it may well be the case that for whatever reason, we're not necessarily ready for change. So we may be curious about hypnotherapy or self-hypnosis or any therapeutic approach. And so we start to dip our toe in it. That is a part of the process too, right? Before we get to the point where we get a book on self-hypnosis, or we give Lesley a call and have a session or free with her, we've got to go through our own process. So it's worthwhile mentioning that as we explore these ideas, we're processing this change, we're processing this new felt experience. And as we do that, to feel it in our body and to respond to that feeling in a way that is loving, that is tender, that allows us to open our experience, to broaden our experience. And that seems to be a theme here in what Lesley's talking about. We're talking about opening the access point, if you will, to our unconscious and allowing more to emerge.
They have to be ready and willing and desirous of making that change. And usually that's what, let's face it, a hypnotherapist, I'm the last chance Texaco. I am the last a mental health care professional that somebody is going to see if they are having a major problem. Even if they're biting their nails, they'll go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a psychotherapist and become frustrated, and finally maybe the family doctor, and this is surprising how often a family doctor will recommend me for some kind of habitual behavior that has to be interrupted. So however they get to me, they must be desirous of the change.
And now Lesley makes a distinction. She talks about some different types of hypnotherapy, and I found this to be really interesting.
And now, again, I'm speaking primarily about what I would call mainstream hypnosis. I do work in other areas which are not really formally recognized. I work in metaphysical hypnosis, which means past life regression, interlife regression, and that is also a whole different fascinating area that can lead to tremendous healing, because I believe that people can carry trauma from one lifetime to the next if it isn't resolved. And I don't, and the interesting thing is that multiple lifetimes, it was a part of early Christian doctrine. That was one of the things that was tossed out at the Council of Nicaea. And of course, that would come probably from the Vedic traditions, which are infinitely older. Buddhism is around the same age, but the Vedic traditions probably would have informed that. But multiple lifetimes was part of Christian doctrine.
And stepping back for a moment, I think what's interesting here is how whatever worldview we have, there is a default, or tends to be a default. And there's neurological reasons for this, but broadly speaking, there's a default to these beliefs. And we tend to assume they've always been so, right? That they're just true. And this points out that there's more flexibility, more change, that we have less control, less sense of certainty. And as a result, that regardless of what we believe now, if we can augment that by exploring different beliefs, we can access different states of being. Now, moving from the abstract, Lesley now talks about something that is far from abstract. And I think this is it reflects a wonderful span from the metaphysical aspects that she was just talking about to the pragmatics of bedwetting.
One of the most gratifying areas that I work in is I'm one of the few hypnotherapists who is credentialed in pediatric hypnosis. So I work with a lot of kids, and they are like little sponges. And maybe because I'm a mom, well, I'm a grandmother now, but maybe because I'm a mom myself, I just find it easy to talk to the kids. And I help a lot of kids that are on the spectrum. They're having trouble in school, ADD, maybe high functioning autism, and I help them to, accept themselves and function at school in a really positive way, without fears or without any of the things that sometimes happen with these kids. So I work in bedwetting. Well, it's a thing, and and I can deal with it. So all these things with the kids we deal with without drugs, which is great. And I am not anti-pharmaceutical, but because, psychotropic medications can have a lot of, even at this point, unknown side effects, I just say, let's try something benign first. Let's try something benign and see if it will work. And with kids, almost all of the time it does.
We're going to come back to this, the process of what a therapy session with a kid who's bedwetting might be like. And there's a lot we can extrapolate from that. But just to go back to the idea of drugs, or the way in which therapy is not, or hypnotherapy is not intrusive, I think this helps to move away from some of the medicalization about our experiences, which is to say, are the experiences we have the same as a broken leg or as some kind of other illness?
First of all, if bedwetting is 90-some% a male issue, And the reason for this is completely physical. Most boys get their height before their bladder is big enough to hold all of their urine throughout the night. This is, most of the time, this is the whole thing. That they're getting their height, they're 11, they're 12, or maybe it even goes on earlier, but they have their height before their bladder is developed enough to hold all the urine during the night. And most often that's the issue. So what we do is we just sensitize them to the bladder being full. It's it sounds ridiculously simple, and in a sense it is. But we talk to the subconscious mind, and we ask the subconscious mind to wake up the individual when the bladder is full, or we call it the bladder balloon. We use the metaphor again, or the analogy of a balloon most of the time, and it works. What can I say?
So, what's striking to me about this is, from an existential perspective, this really moves into a fundamental tenet, which has to do with choice. And I can imagine all too well that a child is having an issue, the parents are feeling stressed about what to do, the child is feeling stressed about what to do. And an approach is taken that is a medical approach, or otherwise is a shaming approach that pathologizes what, as Lesley pointed out, is often a physiological part of growth, right? That in the case of boys, they will tend to grow faster than their bladder. And this speaks to the creativity and the compassion to which we bring ourselves to hearing and listening to people and their experience. And that lifts us out of the shame and the anxiety that shame creates.
Kids need reassurance, man. I thought it was tough when I was a kid. I'm born in 1956. I thought all of that was tough. It's nothing compared to what these kids have dealt with today, especially with the in and out of school, with the COVID. And that's very hard for kids with any issues or on the spectrum. Transitions are really hard for them. So the in and out of school. And anyway, I love working with the kids. And hypnosis is an incredibly powerful treatment that doesn't mean you have to get involved with psychotropic drugs with your young kid. Yeah.
And so I asked Lesley to give us a bit more of a sense of how hypnotherapy works now. And she's going to walk us through the historical approach to dealing with, for example, helping somebody dealing with a fear, and talking more about the contemporary understanding through our understanding about neuroscience and the mind and the way in which we can imagine or mentalize things and get the same kind of results that formerly we thought we had to engage in a very physical way, in a very manifest way.
In dealing with fears, with phobias, which is a lot of what I do too, it used to be believed in the early, 20th century that to release a fear, it had to be re-experienced gradually through progressive desensitization. In other words, say someone, arachnophobia, was afraid of spiders, so at the mental health care facility of the day, they would fill a cage with spiders, and the person who was experiencing the phobia would put their hand in maybe for 3 seconds the first day, maybe for a minute the second day, but it had to be physically done. Well, in the phobia protocol that we use in hypnotherapy, which is really Ericksonian, we're all Milton Erickson devotees. That's modern hypnosis. He's the guy that put it together and, made it a viable, easy way to practice this modality. So we do use progressive desensitization, but it's all in the head. In other words, say someone comes to me with the fear of spiders. I have a session with them first to see how receptive they are and blah, blah, blah. But the phobia protocol, we have the patient or client list from 1 to 10 the aspects of their fear. Like if it's a fear of spiders, number one, looking around my bedroom floor to see if I see any spider webs. That could be number one. Number two, looking at the ceiling or seeing a spider crawling in the windowsill. So the client does that, and even by analyzing their fear, it begins to work. So, number 10 can be, 14 spiders on my face biting my body and a giant one coming through the window, or whatever. So we put the person in trance, and they have made their list, right? Now we also have created for them a safe space. In other words, I have the client imagine the safest, most beautiful, most wonderful place where they could ever be. It could be real, it could be imagined, it doesn't matter. So they have created their space. And now I begin working these levels of fear. And as soon as the person is not able to tolerate it, like say I get to number 4 and there's a spider on your arm and the person feels anxiety, then they give me an ideomotor response, usually like a finger sticking up or something, and I take them back to their safe place. And I say, you're safe, you're fine. And then we toggle back. So we have to go through all of those phases of the phobia, but we don't have to do it all in one session. But some people, it's so much, they can only get through half of it. Some people are able to go through the whole thing in one. But it's progressive desensitization, sped up to the quantum level. And the person is really an observer in a sense. They're not made to re-experience the physicality of the phobia. But yet, the nervous system does not know the difference between imagination and reality. So if the nervous system believes it, it's going to work.
It struck me that it seemed like this virtual reality that we could get ourselves into could be just as healing as the physical realities that had been previously used in this kind of therapy.
It is a sort of an etheric virtual reality. I couldn't put it any better. And people have amazing imaginations. I mean, this is, you can ask them to do, they create things. People are endlessly creative and fascinating. I think that's one of the things that keeps me going. I'm so curious about people, and always have been as an actor, as a singer. I always have been curious about what makes people tick. And so every person is a new fascination to me. And it's an endlessly interesting process to work with people in therapy.
This idea of curiosity, we've talked about curiosity in a variety of different ways over the course of all these podcasts. And one of the things that strikes me about curiosity that I return to is by being open, by settling ourselves, by getting ourselves into a space where we can think about different ways of looking at perspectives and options and all the rest of it, by being, in short, curious. We are expressing ourselves in a calm way, that we can only really be curious when we are safe. And so one way to think about this is to ask ourselves, how curious am I about a given situation? And if the answer is, I'm not very curious at all, then it follows that there's a degree or some way in which we aren't feeling safe enough to express ourselves creatively. We perhaps feel that doing so would lead us to a vulnerable state. And it's this next point about vulnerability that I want to turn. Lesley talks about control in the therapeutic process, or in the hypnotherapeutic process. And this is really interesting.
Some individuals are very protective of me not getting to a certain level. They don't want to remember the trauma, and they don't want me to dig it up. So they're defensive. So that would be another, another reason. But most people have no trouble relaxing. And as I said, unconsciousness is not mandatory. In fact, sometimes kids don't even close their eyes. We call that waking hypnosis. And that's what goes on all weekend on the kids' channels with advertising. Waking hypnosis. Telling those kids what they need and want.
The thing that's so interesting to me about this is we often have this idea of control in our lives, that we need to have control. Yet, clearly when we watch television or when we do a variety of things like that, we give over this control. Yet we tell ourselves we still have control, but we are being infiltrated, you could say, by all of these different expressions on a level that really is impacting us and we're not aware of it.
But I guess if I could put any point across, it would be that there is absolutely nothing to fear. The client or patient is really always in control, and nothing happens unless you want it to happen.
And if nothing happens unless we want it to happen, the question is, why do we turn away from, or why are we apprehensive about exploring this space?
I think it's easy for people to become afraid or uneasy when there are introspective processes or things that they interpret as introspective. And again, some of this is cultural too. Now, I can speak, I'm like yourself, I'm Irish and Scottish and a bit of English. And although we're all in the entertainment business, we tend to be shut down. Not me, but the male people particularly. The coping mechanisms are limited to alcohol intake. I mean, there's in my family, I have found the most shut down people who, from our own, what I would have to say, our own culture. People who are Muslim and they pray 5 times a day, bam, bang, zoom, they're in there. I have never had resistance from any person of the Islamic faith. They're already tuned up if they are practicing. Because as I said before, I believe that prayer it also puts you into the alpha state, especially a kind of mind-body prayer, like what is performed in the Islamic faith. But hypnotherapy is completely wide open. I have treated Orthodox Jews, Buddhist monks, lawyers, judges. It is a treatment that can work for everybody. It's just that the practitioner has to know how to talk to those individual people. And I suppose that's what makes a good practice.
And this idea of how to talk to somebody, how to create a space that a person can open themselves in, is worth spending a moment on, because we can have situations where we meet somebody who has a different view than us, different set of beliefs than us, and we experience that difference in some way as a threat. This is a generalization, but broadly speaking, we experience it as a threat. And once that threat system is engaged, then we move away from what I was saying earlier about being creative and being in a space within which we can explore and see different perspectives and experience things in different ways and so on and so forth. And by allowing ourselves to open, we can start to explore ourselves in a variety of different ways. And it's this theme that I think occurs throughout my conversation with Lesley about hypnotherapy, that opening opens. And as naive as that may sound, it is kind of the basic truth here, that if we open ourselves to experience, open ourselves to different feelings, different expressions and thoughts and so on and so forth, then there is more that we can experience and less that we are guarding ourselves against. So imagine for a moment that you are in a situation that is a little stressful, whatever that is, and it's picking up to the point where you're feeling a little anxiety, just a little, yet you feel focused, you feel in control, you feel like you're seeing it happen. It's almost as if it's slowing down as you are experiencing these things. What has shifted is your perspective. Now, you are in control and you are out of control. And this is where we get into this paradox of what control actually is.
The factors that would make someone resistant to hypnosis know no gender or age. It's all about that controlling quality or the protection of the person's troubled past.
So there very well may be reasons why we have these boundaries, these barriers, these protection systems. And it may be the case that moving too quick is in itself an upsetting, unsettling, triggering situation. Yet, as throughout this podcast Lesley discusses, moving into it slowly and then coming back to that safe place, what's referred to as titration or developing a window of tolerance, starts to increase our capacity to expand. And so through this process, we are opening. And this is one of the things that I took away from hypnotherapy and thinking about self-hypnotherapy and the way in which, meditation for that matter, the way in which we can ground ourselves in this awareness of our experience that is outside the control that we have of the good, bad, right, wrong, this belief, that belief. In other words, outside of the mentally constructed habits that we follow in our behaviors, whether that's eating, smoking, drinking, whatever it is, we start to say, okay, well, these are habits that I've become so accustomed to that for me to untangle, for me to open, for me to become curious about what they mean or do not mean or how those meanings may transform is a way of expanding myself beyond the confines of my own constructed reality and therefore a form of freedom, a form of liberation. So I was really happy to talk with Lesley, and I'm going to leave her to take us out here, and she's going to tell us about some of the things she's doing next. But I can tell you, for me, the conversation was a real eye-opener to what hypnotherapy actually is, and to hear somebody speak so eloquently about the manner in which hypnotherapy is such a natural and innate part of the human consciousness experience, which is to say, the experience of exploring that which is our own humanity. Speaks to the vitality of openness, reflection, connection, and curiosity. So I want to thank Lesley again for coming on the show, and I'll let her take it out with what she's doing next.
Well, I am thinking, for one thing, that as we discussed earlier, that hypnosis is going to have a much bigger place in therapy in general. I think it's, now that doctors are recommending it, now that we have the real-time mapping of the brain, Jordan, this is what has validated hypnosis. Neuroscience has validated it. We can hook someone up and we can put them in trance and we can regress them. And what's lighting up in their brain are the deep memory centers, the amygdala, not where you would expect the creative centers of the brain to be, which are just off the frontal lobe. So we know that when people are recalling memories or being regressed, they are experiencing a memory process. So it's been proven. So there's going to be more efficacy. There are 2 more books on the horizon. My most recent book, Intersections, has done pretty well. It's a little bit far out. You might have to put on your tinfoil hat for that one. But what's coming up next is a humorous biographical book called Woman on the Road. It's show business stories from my life, and it's just meant to be humorous, and that's the next thing I'm doing, and so that'll keep me pretty busy for a while.
So if somebody wants to find you, where can they go? How can they?
I am very easy to find. You can always email me at Lesley, Lesley, at lightworkhypnosis.com. And that's all one word, lightworkhypnosis.com, Lesley, Lesley. And I will get back to you. I always get back to everyone. May take me a minute, but I promise to get back. And even if you just have a question, no question is too small. I'm happy to answer, anything that you want to know about hypnosis. If I can't answer it, I'll find someone who can. That's for sure. I'm not, the great sage of hypnotherapy. I didn't reinvent the wheel. I'm here doing something that's 6,000 years old and trying to bring it into the modern era.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jordan. Good luck to you, and I'll see you soon.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks again to Lesley for speaking with me. And until next time, bye for now.